This is Heart of the City. I'm Chuck Olmstead for 8:20 a.m. The Word. Well, I've got a dear, dear friend in studio today, and I'm so glad that she's back, and her name is Rebecca Pratt with Orphan Relief and Rescue. Rebecca, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
It's so good to see you. Well, I told you as we were chatting about what we're going to talk about today that I'm going to have a very strange introduction to you. Because as you were talking about what you'd like to share today, I thought of a Seinfeld episode.
Okay.
All right. So
All right.
You want to hear what that episode is?
Yes, very curious.
I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan or not, but there was an episode where George decided he was going to be opposite George. In other words, whatever his intuition and his impulse was, he was going to do the opposite, because obviously for him, whatever impulse he had was always wrong, right?
Yeah.
With George Costanza. And so as you were talking to me today about basically learning to live opposite of what our intuitions are,
Yes.
I thought of George Costanza in the Seinfeld episode, because you had a scripture in Matthew chapter 10 that you were referring to, and I'd love for you to read for it so we can talk about this scripture.
Yes, I was telling you that one of the greatest lessons that I've learned in my 23 years of mission work is that when I choose to give up my life for all that God is asking of me or prompting my heart to do, instead of losing my life, that's when I actually find it. And it's completely opposite than anything that the world feeds us. You know, they say fight for what you want, and, you know, you have to go to the top. And yet it's completely opposite in kingdom principles with the Lord. And the scripture, of course, that goes along with that is the Matthew 10:39. If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. And that is what I have found over and over and over again, that truly when I surrender everything and just, in a sense, give up my own will and my own dreams, God resurrects a whole different thing that's even better and more grand than I could ever imagine. And I literally find my life in that process. And it's a bizarre thing, because it's the biggest struggle of It's been the biggest struggle of my life to truly surrender and give up my life, because I'm a very strong-willed person. Anybody who knows me knows I am very strong-willed, and I have a hard time backing down if somebody is coming up, you know, head-to-head. And yet the Lord, when he comes head-to-head with us and asks us to do something, and we truly say, okay, I'll do it, and we literally give up our will for what we thought we needed to do or wanted to do, then the Lord just brings these beautiful things to pass as we walk in surrender and just say yes to the Lord. And so, yeah, I'm in shock, because I'm living this extraordinary life in partnership with the Lord, along with, in my second book, Inspired to Live an Extraordinary Life, Even Through Difficult Circumstances. I share a lot of those things, but my last chapter is that single most important truth that far surpasses any other truth that I have experienced is the truth to give up. Give up.
So what is it that we're giving up? When you talk about clinging to things, and what is it that we have to give up when we're thinking about that?
Yeah, for me, it was I didn't want to go to Africa. I was very clear with my husband on things that I would and would not do in our married life. And we both did want to go into missions at some point for a couple years stint. But I told him, you know, it will never be to the voodoo witchcraft areas. You know, I think that's very irresponsible to take your family to places like that where they can be cursed. And, you know, we have 3 kids, and they were very young at that time. And, you know, in Africa was definitely out of the question, because, you know, it's just, I'm a very sanitary person, and, you know, all of the germs and things like that I was not going to do. Mm-hmm. And so I had my list. My husband can tell you my list of what all my things were. And he literally said, you know, I just literally shut my mouth and a lot of times just prayed that God would change your mind if that was what he wanted us to do. And God would hit me good. And it was usually, at a church service or something where I was, watching a video. And one particular time it was watching a Watch the Lamb video on an Easter service. And I just started bawling, and I couldn't stop the tears, and the lights were down, and I was like embarrassed and thinking, oh my gosh, my tears have to stop before the lights come on. I don't want people to see me cry. And the Lord just really gently spoke to my heart and said, you have not surrendered to me fully. And at that time, I felt that I was just a great Christian that had, was raising our kids for the Lord and doing all the right things, going to church, helping my neighbor, And the Lord said, you haven't surrendered, number one, missions, and then he wanted us to lead a marriage ministry training, and I was fighting that as well. And so, yeah, that Sunday is when I literally just said, okay, I'll surrender for real, and it was just this very emotional experience with the Lord at that time, and it's the beginning.
Yeah. Do you think that the Lord understand? I mean, that list that you had talked to your husband about. Do you think the Lord understands where that list comes from and why we have that list, whatever it is in our lives that? Yes. Obviously he knows the list because, he made us and he knows everything about us. He knows every hair on our head. So obviously he knows the list that we have of the won't do, Yeah,
the list for me, I think, was fear-based. Everything that I said I would not do was fear-based. It was what I had fear that could come to harm my family, my children, myself, So I had all these protection mechanisms around that by saying, I will never do this, 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 and this, not realizing that that's not God's economy at all. Mm-hmm. And he shattered every single one of those horrific, fears that I had. He shattered them pretty big by plopping us in the middle of the voodoo capital of the world in Benin. And we are 30 minutes away from the largest child trafficking ring, and 95% of the people practice voodoo and witchcraft.
Well, I want to talk about that idea of how God then shatters and works in your life. But let's just take a 2-minute, 3-minute pause, because some people that are listening to you right now don't know who Rebecca Pratt is, and they don't know who Orphan Relief and Rescue is. So let's do a 3-minute plug for Orphan Relief and Rescue.
Yes. So Orphan Relief and Rescue, my husband and I founded that 13 years ago. We worked in Africa for 2 years on a hospital ship. And after our 2 years in Africa was up, we couldn't sleep at night because of all that God was showing us for these kids that needed help, who were in abusive, deplorable conditions. So we went back to start Orphan Relief and Rescue to help the children that no one else was helping, and the ones that we knew would die if we did not go back. So 13 years later, now we have rescued hundreds of children out of trafficking. We've brought children back from slavery. We've helped hundreds of parents on our microfinance loan program so that they can provide for their families. They're the same parents that had sold at least one child into trafficking, mainly because they couldn't feed them all, and they would pick one to work for their own keep to provide for the family. So that's the world that we have said yes to with the Lord. And in the places where I thought I would never go, I've actually found the greatest joy and the greatest fulfillment, and more than I could have ever imagined in this walk with the Lord.
Well, let's talk about the process. You used the word shattered, but yet when you say that, you were talking about an experience in church where you were weeping and the Lord's presence came on you. Do you see that, or would you agree that when the Lord speaks to us, he's usually pretty gentle?
Very gentle. He doesn't force us to do anything. I knew I wasn't being forced to say yes, but I knew there was something deeper and better that the Lord had, that I was holding him back from bestowing upon me, honestly. And the tears really were a brokenness. I love reading through the Psalms of David, just pouring his heart out to the Lord. And a lot of it is just him being very real of his fears and all the crazy things that, people trying to kill him and sicknesses and different things that he went through. And he just pours his heart out to the Lord. And once he surrenders and gives it over to the Lord, then the next Psalms after those brokenness times are just reveling in the beauty of the Lord and singing of the beauty and the holiness and the majesty of the Lord. And that is really what I feel like for me, I knew in my tears that I was holding back from God's highest in my life. And I didn't know fully what that looked like, but I knew I was holding it back. And so it was a point of saying, okay, I'll trust you. So it was more of a trust thing. And then learning to give that surrender mode up to the Lord and just saying, I'll give up. I'll do whatever you say, and I'll trust you. I'll jump off the cliff, basically, with you and trust that you're going to catch me. And that was the beginning of this, really a supernatural life began, of watching the Lord do beautiful things through my life.
I'm not sure why this image comes up, but my wife is a cat person, right? We've always had cats throughout our life, and we have this cat now that absolutely loves me, and she's chosen me. I've not chosen her, and this cat, she loves to lay down next to me, and she exposes her belly so her belly can be rubbed.
Yes.
And that's a real sign of any kind of an animal like that is willing to be exposed on their belly side, that they're vulnerable.
Yes.
Because the defense mechanism for a wild animal obviously is they want to guard all of their vital organs, right?
Yes.
And so this cat, she just loves to be, and it's interesting because when she exposes herself, her belly, then she begins to find that comfort because she gets scratched and she loves it. And, there's just that feeling that she has. And you can tell, and she's purring, and she's a very happy, satisfied cat. And it's interesting that when we kind of expose our bellies, if you will, to the Lord and that vulnerability, the Lord is not going to harm us.
No.
He's going to provide a way to where we're going to find satisfaction in our lives, and when we expose ourselves and say, Lord, I am vulnerable to this. I am afraid. I am very concerned about sanitary conditions and the health of my family, but knowing that the Lord's going to protect us and guard us in that, and in that we're going to find that satisfaction that only comes from Him.
Yeah, and He is so gentle. He's not forcing it, but I think it's understanding really the character of God, like you said, that He's not gonna, harm us and hurt us. It's not that bad things won't happen to us, as we walk forward, because I share a lot of those things in the book as well. But God does cover us and protects us and helps us walk through those difficult things, which in turn make us stronger for what He wants us to accomplish.
And as we're talking about the opposites, if you will, the world is telling us such an opposite thing, isn't he? That, hey, you need to brand yourself. You need to guard yourself. You need to watch out and make sure that, you're not going to get taken advantage of, and that, you're being naive to think that if you do this, if you give up your rights to this, that you're going to be harmed or you're not going to be taken care of. It's just the opposite of what the world is saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And when you step forward in faith and ask the Lord, to just basically protect you and guide and direct you, He does show up in a supernatural way that you can't explain and you can't fathom unless you surrender and say yes. And that's where the beautiful life is unexplainable unless you walk through it.
Yeah. Well, tell me some stories about as the Lord's challenged you with this idea of surrender. some of the stories of the people that have been touched by the ministry.
Yeah, so we've been just going over testimonies with our staff. We do devotionals every Thursday on Zoom, Liberia, Benin, U.S. side. And So our country director, he shared his testimony 2 weeks ago and said that his grandfather was the highest voodoo priest of his whole village, and he had the highest ranking power. And his father, so Peter is his name, the country director, his father was raised in this voodoo witchcraft and was dedicated to the voodoo practice, which is basically dedicated to Satan. And God miraculously saved his father through a Assembly of God pastor in the area who showed him the almighty powerful God, poured holy water on all his voodoo shrines, and the voodoo shrines over a 24-hour period all cracked. And he went back to the pastor and said, "What kind of power are you carrying? Because this has never happened before." And the Assembly of God pastor led him to the Lord and said, "We serve the most powerful God who created us." And so Peter is the son of this man, and he has planted a church and planted 3 other churches, and it's just incredible. But I was like, gosh, Peter, you broke the cycle of that voodoo and witchcraft, and where your lineage was dedicated really to Satan. You've broken all that, and now you're sharing Jesus with everybody. And of course, he's our country director, where he's at the forefront of rescuing hundreds of kids from trafficking, and all these parents are coming to Jesus and all this stuff. And then our second woman in charge, she's over the microfinance, and her direct mother was the highest ranking voodoo priestess of her village and dedicated her to Satan. And she said when she was a grown woman, she decided to be a Muslim because all her friends were Muslim. And then she had somebody witness to her about Jesus, and she ended up accepting the Lord through numerous circumstances. But she's an incredible Jesus lover. But the cool thing is they all aren't afraid of the voodoo and witchcraft because they know what they came from, and they know that you're stuck in it, in the cycle of fear, practicing it because of fear. And they are all just bringing just hundreds of people to Jesus by loving them into the kingdom and just sharing about the most powerful God. And of course, they tell them to bring all their sick people to them, and they're praying for them, and they're getting, healed, and people are seeing the miraculous. That's a lot of how they come to Jesus, is through seeing that this is the most powerful God in the universe. But it's humbling to realize the people that God has placed in our path. And I'm just now hearing the details of their testimony years later. I knew their conversion experience, but I didn't even ask, about their parents and grandparents, and here they came from just crazy places. And yeah, it's incredible.
The question I wrote down as you were sharing just a few minutes earlier, and I know you probably can't give this answer fully because it's basically this: what would have happened if you had not said yes? Would God have provided another person? Possibly, But when you share these stories, you think about when you were shedding those tears and surrendering, in that church service, and saying, "Okay, Lord, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm gonna trust you in this." Yeah. You think, what would have happened if I said no? For your own personal life and your life of your family, and then all the people that you've been able to touch throughout all these years. If you had said no, so we miss. So oftentimes we miss the extraordinary things of life when we say no. Yeah. And the Lord's still going to love us. He's still going to be with us, and His presence is going to be there. But the really cool things of life and the life-impacting things are happening when we surrender, when we do die to ourselves. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that's a humbling thought. And tears are streaming down my face right now as you're talking, because it's very sobering to realize that, I say, from a simple yes, a simple surrender, that God could do such extraordinary things. But that's the God that we serve. We serve this extraordinary God, and God is just waiting for his people to say yes so that he can do these crazy, amazing things through our life and setting people free. And it's humbling and it's sobering, and it's honestly shocking to think that had I stayed in my stubbornness and said no, countless people would probably not have heard about this incredible Jesus that we serve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about that, Rebecca, and I think the Lord's just challenging me, and just to share the fact that there may be people who are listening who had that point in their life and they did say no, and they're feeling pretty guilty about it.
Yeah.
And the reality is that the Lord, even in that circumstance, wants you to respond with a yes now.
Yes.
What you understand now.
Yeah.
It may have been 2 months ago. It could have been 25 years ago where that person said no.
Yeah.
But yet our God is a loving God and a redeeming God.
Yes.
And he gives us the ability at any time in our lives to say yes, and he will do his good work at that time.
Yeah, he's such a redeemer, a restorer, and a rescuer. And in every aspect of our life and the lives of those in front of us. And it's never too late.
It never is.
Yeah.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I'd just love for you to wrap up with another story or just another thought as we've been talking about surrender, as we've been talking about saying yes and not saying no to the Lord. And I'd just love you to wrap us up.
Yeah, there's so many scriptures that I could read, but one thing, my dad, when he was called into missions, I'm a missionary kid, he was in a church service and he heard a guest speaker that says, if your faith isn't costing us something, then it's not worth very much. And he says he couldn't shake that when he left. And he thought, my faith isn't costing me anything. I'm pretty comfortable. And that's the way I was before. And he said he, at that time, just decided to surrender himself to the Lord. And he went 17 years into Mexico and just raised 5 kids. I was one of them, and dragged us through Mexico as a missionary kid, seeing the power of God, transform people's lives. And that's what each of us, is our faith costing us anything? And if it isn't, then it's not worth very much. And so that's something that stuck with me as I grew up. And but it's a beautiful thing to follow the Lord. It's an adventure.
I think there's a scripture in Psalm that says, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. And I think that is the idea of sacrifice, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, it's not a sacrifice if it doesn't cost you anything,
Yeah.
And the idea is in that sacrifice, the Lord is willing to use whatever it is that you're sacrificing for his glory and for his honor.
Yes, for sure.
Well, if somebody wants to find out more about Orphan Relief and Rescue, we've got about 45 seconds. Just let us know how they can reach out to you.
Yeah, you can go to our website at orphanreliefandrescue.org, all one word, lowercase. They can go to my personal website, Rebecca M, stands for Marie, Pratt.com. And reach out.
Well, Rebecca, I want to thank you for sharing the word today, and that word is surrender. And I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate your good word, the good work, the extraordinary life that you're living, and encouraging others to do the same.
Sweet. Thank you, Chuck.
God bless.